Christian Parenting.
Aloha, friends! Welcome to the Boy Mom Podcast, powered by Christian Parenting and hosted by my mom, Monica Swanson. On the Boy Mom Podcast, it is our goal to provide you with practical advice and biblical wisdom for raising boys in this sometimes crazy world. You can find show notes for the podcast over at monicaswanson.com/podcast. We're so glad you're here.
I really love asking boys with consistency questions like, if he's coming home and reporting being mad at his friend or feeling like his coach was unfair and didn't give him playing time, asking questions like, what was your part? What was your contribution? Doing a lot of listening and empathy on the front side, and then always tabling that question as a way of helping him anchor to that idea of all relationships are a two-way street.
Hey friends, welcome to the show. And you are just listening to a clip from today's conversation with David Thomas. And I'm so excited to dive into this topic. It is so good. And this is actually part 2. Back in episode 78, David and I talked about the 4 emotional milestones our sons need to reach, as well as some of the stumbling blocks that get in the way. And now today we are talking about the 4 social milestones our sons need to reach. And oh my goodness, if you've got a son or 2 or more, I think you'll be like me, just resonating, almost giggling throughout this conversation, because everything he shared, I was like, yep, I've seen that. I know that one. And it is just so important that we help our boys develop these social skills, help them reach these social milestones. I think you're going to find tons of practical encouragement, tools, conversations to have with your sons in this episode. So I'm really excited to share it with you. I just appreciate David Thomas so much. And yes, we'll be linking to where you can find and follow him. Get your hands on his books. Today we're pulling from his book, Are My Kids on Track?, which covers the 12 milestones that our sons need to reach, emotional, social, and spiritual. So I've already asked David if he had come back on to talk about the spiritual milestones our sons need to reach. But guys, he is just a wealth of wisdom, a great resource. So I'll be linking to his podcasts and books and everything else in the show notes. And so I want to dive into this conversation, but I'll pause real quick here to just thank you again for your ratings and reviews, for spreading the word about this podcast. We are getting more downloads every month, and I'm so encouraged to see this community growing. There's so much encouragement here, and I just appreciate you so much. If you have not subscribed to this podcast yet, I hope you'll do that. It's real easy. Just tap subscribe on your smartphone. And also, one thing that I love is when you take a screenshot of the episode you're listening to and just share it to your story on Instagram or upload it to Facebook. That is a way that your friends can discover the Boy Mom Podcast and hopefully start to follow as well. So thanks again for being here. You're going to love this episode. So without further ado, here's David Thomas and I talking about the social milestones our sons need to reach. I hope you enjoy. All right, David, welcome back on the Boy Mom Podcast.
Thank you for having me back. I'm grateful to be here.
Yes, it was super good to have you on already talking about boys and emotional milestones with boys, a topic I just love and I think is so important. So if anyone didn't catch that, they'll have to go back and be sure to listen. But for those who are just tuning in, maybe for the first time, can you tell us just a brief introduction, who you are and what you do?
I would be honored to. I am a therapist and I work in an amazing place in Nashville, Tennessee called Daystar Counseling. Have been there for almost 25 years and we serve just the pediatric population. So we only work with kids, adolescents, and families. We do our work a little different in that we work in a house rather than an office complex, and we use therapy dogs as part of our practice, which I love.
I so want to visit your little yellow house.
I
It looks
want
so
you
cute.
to.
I'm going
I
to
hope if
come.
you're ever in Nashville, you will come
I
visit.
have to.
But I'm here to tell you, I really want to visit where you live.
Yeah,
We want to talk
you're
about
welcome here
vacation
too.
envy. It's Hawaii. But thank you.
Well,
But I've been grateful to have called Nashville home for a long time. And in addition to the kids I work with, I have 3 of my own. I have a daughter and twin boys. And my wife and I have been married for 25 years. She is a remarkable human being. Thankful, really thankful for the gift of all of them.
I love it. Well, you've written a number of books that have been an encouragement to me over the years and really helped me as I wrote Boy Mom. And now I'm just a huge fan of your podcast, one that you do with a little crew that you work with called Raising Boys and Girls. And then also you have All About Boys, which is, do you do one episode a month? Is that how that one works?
That is correct. I'm doing one
Okay.
episode a month, and then that I'm guesting. I'm guest appearing on that. It's Rooted Ministries who puts that on, and they
Okay.
throw in some additional great content for
Hmm.
all kinds of aspects of things related to kids and adolescents.
Right. Well, I just really appreciate all the podcasts that you do. And definitely anyone who's listening to the Boy Mom podcast would get a lot out of those. So we'll be linking to those in show notes as well as the books that we are mentioning. And today we're going to take off kind of from where we left off. We're referring to the book, Are My Kids on Track? And David wrote this with Sissy Goff, who has been on an episode here already, as well as Melissa. I want to say it right. Is it
Trevathan.
Trevathan. Okay,
Yes.
Trevathan. And they're just all amazing working together there at the little yellow house that I want to visit. But this book, Are My Kids on Track? It is the 12 emotional, social, and spiritual milestones your child needs to reach. And David really touches a lot on boys in this way. And I want to talk today about the social milestones that boys need to reach and some of the stumbling blocks along the way. So I'm going to let you lead us if you can just dive in and get started.
I'd love to. I'll define the 4 first, and then we can talk about some stumbling blocks, things that get in the way, and then how we can help boys develop more in this direction. And Micah, I'd love to say on the front side, with all of these milestones, we talk about seeing them like muscles, and that for some kids, they're just weaker, less developed muscles, and for some kids, they're stronger. And we don't always understand why some kids just seem to be really well developed and instinctive when it comes to empathy, and other kids are pretty weak in vocabulary. The good news being, wherever you find the kids you love, that muscle can get stronger, but it takes some work. It takes some practice. But I think that's
So
such
good.
hopeful
Hopeful.
information.
Yes.
And also that kids are progressing toward these all throughout development. These milestones are different than the physical milestones where we want to see a child crawling by a certain age, walking by a certain age.
Sure.
No kid has completely developed empathy by the time they're 10 years old. That's something we hopefully are working toward all
Right.
throughout into adulthood. So I would encourage parents in that way as you think about these. But the four social that we talk about, the first is the milestone of awareness. And generally speaking, and there certainly are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, girls are going to be a little stronger in awareness. In fact, girls can be hyper aware. They can be too aware,
Sure.
too consumed with social circumstances. Boys can struggle with a lack of awareness more oftentimes.
Yes.
So we have to work a little harder to kind of help them develop stronger awareness of self and others both. We can talk more about that in a minute. The second is the milestone of reciprocity. And that's a big fancy word for just the give and take of relationship, the back and forth. And that every healthy relationship, every healthy conversation is going to be a two-way street. Every healthy conversation is going to involve, hopefully, me listening and talking, answering questions and asking questions. And so it's developing mastery around the rhythm and the pace and the consistency of that.
That is huge.
It is huge.
That my mom used to always say, this is on a small scale, but you have to be a friend to have a friend.
Absolutely. And that's the
Yes.
truth of reciprocity right there.
It
That's
is.
it. I love that you said that. And I think about how many adults I encounter who still have some work to do on that muscle.
Oh, for sure.
I remember pre-COVID being at a dinner party one night, and I was seated next to this brilliant man, highly intelligent gentleman, and the dinner lasted no longer than probably 35, 40 minutes. And I remember getting up from the table because it felt like about 8 hours because he talked about himself nonstop. Like, I remember getting up and thinking, I don't think you even know my name.
Right. Yep.
I know you don't know anything about me, but I don't think you know my name because you taught. He never got reciprocity down. It was a one-way conversation. It was a one-sided relationship. And so it's important to develop reciprocity. And we can talk more about that. The third milestone is the milestone of ownership. And research tells us that when something goes wrong in a girl's life, she will more instinctively blame herself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think that's true for adult women. I sit with moms in my office every day who are asking some version when they see their kids struggle of, what am I doing wrong?
Sure.
They'll automatically take on more ownership sometimes than is needed. I think about the
And you don't see the
commercial.
dads? Are the dads? I'm
No,
curious.
they are not. No, the research says that when something goes wrong in a boy's life, he will tend to blame other people.
Uh-huh.
And it's fascinating to me how early that starts. In fact, I opened the chapter on ownership with a story about one of my sons when he was no older, I think, than 5 years old. And he had a soccer game on a Saturday morning, and we were racing around the house trying to get out the door on time. And he came up to my wife and said, "What did you do with my soccer cleats?"
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I remember being so struck by that question,
Because you
thinking,
knew.
absolutely, as if she had worn them the night before with her
Right.
black skirt and blouse, but in nothing inside of him thought to ask, "Have you seen my soccer cleats?
Oh,
Do you
this
know
is
where
every
I
day at
put
my
them?"
house.
Absolutely, that's
It's
every day with
surfboards,
15
it's
boys as
every
you live. Yes, and I think that's so important to focus in on. And in
I
fact,
love it.
the other swing that I think happens with boys, I go a little bit deeper into it, is I think when boys don't swing toward blame, they swing toward shame. So it's either someone else's
Sure.
fault. I was talking to a mom just yesterday in my office, and her son is struggling. He's in 9th grade. So obviously the work's kind of accelerated in high school. And she said, I was, trying to sit down at the table with him for a few minutes to help him get unstuck in some difficult math. And within 10 minutes of a conversation, he went from saying about his teacher, "She doesn't know how to teach it the right way,"
Yep.
to the other side saying, "I'm such an idiot."
Yep.
It's
Oh,
that
I've seen
swing
this.
from
Mm-hmm.
blame to shame, and they can't get to that healthy middle space of ownership, of just, I call it name, blame, shame, or name. And name is
Sure.
just naming my part,
I love that. Yeah, which reflects back on our last conversation about emotional milestones, where
Yes,
it's the healthy places to find the happy medium. It's not either extreme, it's somewhere between those two.
right.
So good. Love
So
that.
that's an important one for boys to be moving toward. And then the fourth
Yes.
milestone is the milestone of boundaries. And we talk about that within relationships. Generally speaking, boys are going to struggle a little more with respecting boundaries, pushing
Yep.
against boundaries. Girls struggle a little more with setting them
Yes. Yes.
and
I
keeping them in
agree.
place. And so we talk about what does it look like to help boys develop in those directions within the context of relationship. And so those are the four. And then, within each chapter, we go deep into what are some of the stumbling blocks for boys, what are some of the stumbling blocks for girls, and what are some of the building blocks to help them get there. And so could
So
I
good.
talk around a few of the
Yeah,
stumbling blocks?
I would love that. And when I'm looking at these, I'm just taking notes madly as we're talking, just thinking like again, in Boy Mama, everything I do, I'm always one to just think, what's the goal? What's the goal? I want my kids to be healthy and ready to launch one day. And I'm just looking at like ownership. And, I don't want to be too I don't want to generalize the millennials, but sometimes I'm like these young adults, they're not taking responsibility.
Yes.
And I think when they're young, if I can teach my 10-year-old that it's not our fault that he left his surfboard at his friend's house and now he doesn't, if we can start talking about these milestones as they're growing up, what a better place they're going to be when they launch into the world if they understand that ownership or that reciprocity,
Absolutely.
all these things. I mean, I just love having the opportunity to learn from you and be able to start focusing in on these as our kids are growing up. So please give us some stumbling blocks.
Well, I would say a first stumbling block. I was actually thinking about it when you were telling that great story about those wise words of you
My mom.
learn to be a friend, to have a friend.
Yeah.
And I think, when I think about reciprocity, I think a lot of kids just don't instinctively know that back and forth of relationship. And
Yeah.
I saw a mom years ago, their family had just relocated to Nashville and had lived in a lot of places. And her son had to change schools multiple times, and he'd struggled a lot in friendships. And she said to me within our conversation before I saw her son, she said, I just think he has not yet met the right kind of friend. And I remember being about 5, maybe 10 minutes into my conversation with her son when I met with him. And I remember thinking, I don't think it's that he hasn't met the right kind
Hmm.
of friend. I don't think he yet knows how
It,
to be the right kind of friend.
yes. So
Because
good.
this kid, like the man at the dinner table, talked at me the whole
Hmm.
time. He talked over me. He
Yeah.
interrupted me. He never talked with me.
Yep.
Never talked. And I think that's one of the key ingredients just within the mechanics of conversation
Mm.
and the larger experience of what it looks like to just be interested in another person for the
Yes.
sake of being curious and interested. And
Yes.
even if it's not something that I'm particularly interested in.
Hmm.
And so I think that's a beginning point where I would challenge a lot of parents. I think as that bleeds over into the milestone of ownership, we talked a little bit about blame and shame being two barriers. And I really love asking boys with consistency questions like, if he's coming home and reporting being mad at his friend or feeling like his coach was unfair and didn't give him playing time, asking questions like, what was your part? What was your contribution?
Yep.
Doing a lot of listening and empathy on the front side, and then always tabling that question as a way of helping him anchor to that idea of all relationships are a two-way street.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think the added layer of that is helping kids develop more perspective and awareness of others. It's like
Mhm.
I had a kid in my office the other day who was real frustrated about his teacher. He felt like was angry with the class. They were kind of goofing off and acting up. And he is a mom who's amazing and asked those kinds of questions with regularity. And he said, my mom and I were talking and she helped remind me that it's probably really hard to teach to a classroom of students while also teaching remotely at the exact same time, which every
Yes.
teacher right now is having to do,
Right.
And so I love that those kinds of questions led him to have greater awareness of others along the
Yep.
way. And so I think that's so key.
So key. I love
I
that.
would also say when I think about awareness, one of the stumbling blocks that I think can be there with young boys, I think sometimes it's enthusiasm. I think about how many elementary age boys I've had in my office. Well, I think even back before that to toddler age boys. Think how often with toddler age boys we're having to remind them to lower their voice, like you're too loud.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
toddler age boys struggle with space, volume, proximity.
Oh, yes.
Those things, they're harder, the mechanics of relationship there. With elementary age boys, sometimes it's just enthusiasm that can get in the way that makes them talk too loud or talk too long. And
Yep.
I've had so many boys in my office, sitting on the couch across from me, talking about something they're really passionate about and not even being aware that they're yelling at some point, they're spitting on me, they're talking so loud. And I'll be like, okay, time out, hang on. Look where you're standing. Listen how loud you're talking. And so we have to hit pause a lot with boys in that space because sometimes, again, just that innocent enthusiasm can override social awareness.
For sure.
Adolescent boys, I think it can be, where they will miss the mechanics oftentimes is tone and execution. I had a mom and dad telling me a story recently in my office of they were downstairs and the mom was like, I feel super exhausted today. What do you think about just ordering out? And the dad's like, I love that idea. Where do you think the kids would want to go? And she's like, I don't know. Let's ask them. And she yelled up to her 14-year-old son, hey, Jeff. And he went, what? And she was like, hey, come to the top of the stairs. He looked down. She was like, I was just going to ask you, where would you love us to order dinner from tonight? But his tone was so abrasive and aggressive.
Sure.
And I genuinely think for that kid, he wasn't aware. I don't think he had the intent of, I'm going to see how angry I can sound when my mom yells my name, but they can lose that awareness in that stage of development simply because they become more self-consumed. It's what happened for every one of us in adolescence.
Yes.
Thinking so much about ourselves that we develop social nearsightedness and we can't pay as great attention to what's out in front of us.
Hey friends, I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. And there is more to come, but I want to pause real quick to just talk a little bit about my book, Boy Mom. Now, many of you know that this podcast grew out of that book. Boy Mom was released in August of 2019, and it is subtitled, What Your Son Needs Most From You. In Boy Mom, I cover the 12 areas I find most important as we raise our sons, because my heart for parenting is it's easy to get caught up in all of the things, to compare yourself with other moms, to try to keep up and do everything. And that will be the fastest way to wear yourself out, hit burnout, and not do a good job at really anything. So I love to focus on the things that matter most, the things that matter when your son is ready to launch into the world. What are the things you really want to see in him? And let's focus on those. So that's what Boy Mom is all about. If you haven't read it yet, if you enjoy the topics I cover on this podcast, I think you will love reading Boy Mom. Now you can get it in the audio version. It's me reading it. And you can also get it digitally or in paperback. And with the holidays coming up, I just want to suggest if you need a gift for someone that is going to be a boy mom, maybe somebody who's expecting, or someone who already has at least one son, maybe a teacher, maybe a grandma, this book is good for anyone that plays a role in raising boys. And so I hope you'll consider ordering a copy to give to a friend, maybe a sister, an auntie, your kid's teacher. So I hope you'll consider adding Boy Mom to your Christmas wish list for yourself or for others. All right, thanks so much, guys. We're going to get back to this conversation, and I hope you enjoy.
The other barrier that I see with a lot of boys, and this may shock some parents listening, but is intelligence. And it has been my experience that the brighter the boy, sometimes, not 100% of the time, but sometimes the more he can struggle socially, because those young men, they have minds that move at 100 miles an hour. They have great ideas, and they can come across in relationships sometimes as know-it-all-ish, as a little bit abrasive and aggressive at times. And so I think we have to do a little more social coaching with those boys, and they're more corrective. I had an 8-year-old boy in my office not long ago who was showing me a card trick. I have a lot of boys who love to bring a deck of cards and show me a card trick, and I love that. And it was honestly a mind-blowing card trick, mind-blowing. And when he finished, I was like, buddy, that was unbelievable. I said, who taught you that? And he said, no one taught me, someone showed me.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, time out. Like, that was completely disrespectful. And again, I don't think that was his intent, but I think he's so dead set on. I think about that line in the book Wonder that you can practice being right or you can practice being kind. And my experience is that a lot of really intelligent boys are highly skilled at being right.
Yes.
But they have to practice more at being kind. And I don't think being kind is just being nice. I think it's being respectful. You know,
absolutely. Yes.
Where I landed with that kid was to say, I want you to be able to tell me what you want to tell me, but I want you to be able to deliver it in a way that's respectful to the other person you're talking with. And that's what we're going to practice doing it over.
I love that. Now, is that what you would suggest to the moms out there who are like, that is my son? How do I even address it? Do you just suggest, and I know one thing I love that you talk about is talking about things when you're not in the heat of the moment. So find a time that isn't a time of conflict, but is this something you would just suggest addressing straight on and say, here's something I'm seeing in you? You know, at least the way I usually approach things is I want so much for you to have great friendships and a great future. And because of that, I'm going to give you a few tips here. I mean, I know not all kids are going to receive that well coming from mom or dad, but is that how you would suggest we approach it?
I absolutely would. And I'd say two things in response to that. One, I love that you framed it in that way of I want to give you some feedback and here's why. And coming from a place of assuming they don't always know, like those two stories. You know, I don't think that adolescent boy knew how harsh his tone was when he yelled the word what. And so I think doing part of what I talk a lot about in the Social Milestones is doing a lot of role play with boys, because it's kind of back to that when I talked in the Emotional Milestones about how boys are primarily visual, spatial, and experiential learners. So anytime I can take it into the experiential context, all right, let's do a do-over. You be you, I'll be me, or I'll be your coach, you be you, and let's practice that hard conversation. Anytime boys can do a dress rehearsal in that way, I think it's a win, and he makes connection stronger in that space.
I love that.
So bring it into an experiential context as often as possible, and practice as many of the moments of life when he might get roadblocked as possible. You know, role play asking a girl to the homecoming dance, role play asking your teacher if I can get some extra credit, role play asking a coach, what do I need to work on to get some extra playing time?
I love that.
Role play asking your brother for forgiveness because you just kind of beat him up verbally. And so those are all role play. I think is a great tool for a lot of different moments in life to kind of help boys make connections.
So good. Okay, I might be hopping a little bit outside of this topic, but this is reminding me of something I heard. Again, I've been binge listening to your podcast, and I bet a lot of other people will too now. But you said something that I got really excited about because it's something I've talked about, and you just affirmed for me that I'm heading down the right track here. And that
Good.
is the importance of boys, especially, I think you said, let me make sure I've got the right age range. It might have been in the Wanderer stage where you talked about the importance of role models, of people outside mom and dad being an influence in your son's lives because they need to hear things from people besides mom and dad. And I got really excited. I don't know if you know this, but I just launched my brand new online course called the Character Training Course. And this really was born out of an experience I had with one of my sons, where when he was 13, we were really struggling with his character. And I did something with him where I brought in daily, because I didn't know what else to call it, I called it character training. But it was just where every day I assigned him, whether I found a list of things, podcasts, TED Talks, some books with really good chapters. These were all things where somebody besides mom and dad were speaking or teaching on the topic of character development in some way. One might have just been on grit. One might have been on perseverance or identity, but they were all somehow related to character. And I share the story in Boy Mom, how this really changed the course of this boy's life and how his character began to be shaped, I believe, by these influences in his life. The other fun thing, I'll plug him while I'm here, but that 13-year-old then is now my 19-year-old, who not only is an incredible college student, but he hosts the Truth for Youth podcast, which I know a lot of my listeners are listening to, or they've got their kids connected to it. But I love that because I believe that he was at a stage at 13 where I could talk all day long, but he needed to be inspired by someone outside of me. And I didn't want to just trust the world, our culture, to be shaping him, but I wanted to say, here, let me help you find some good sources of influence. So can you speak into that a little bit from your perspective?
You are so on target. And I love that you spoke to that, and I 100% agree with you. And it is in that stage in particular where boys become hungry for other voices. And our voice as parents gets softer, and the voice of peers gets louder, and the voices of other adults gets louder. And we want to be praying in trusted other adult voices into our sons' lives who can speak into them. And in fact, one of the things I did was, I did this for years. I would go by Chipotle, because who doesn't love a burrito? And I would buy $100 worth of $10 gift cards. I would just go in and get them, a bunch of them. And I would keep them in my glove compartment because my sons had coaches and male teachers who had captured their attention in remarkable ways, and men and women who are aware of their voices. Like I feel like held that responsibility in such a remarkable way. And so anytime I would, go to parent night at the school, or I would be on the side of the field when they were playing, like I would just slip them a Chipotle card.
I love that.
I want you to know how incredibly grateful I am that you speak into my boys' lives, and take that seriously, and it's not lost on me, and go eat a burrito on me. And so
I love that.
Pass them out right and left because I wanted them to know how meaningful that was in the lives.
Totally.
For the very reason you named.
Yes. And real life, in-person role models. I mean, my boys have had some amazing youth leaders who I give so much credit to for shaping them. But then for those that don't have that in their life, I say find some online, find some somewhere that they can tune into, read about, listen to. I love that so much. Okay, any last stumbling blocks before I let you go?
I think the only other one that I would say when I think about the social that I think is key is competition. I talk about how boys are, naturally, we as males are competitive creatures. It's kind of part of our hardwiring. It's part of how God made us. And that is a good thing. And I'm a huge advocate of the arena of sports for boys as a context for growth and building relationships and learning to win and lose and so many things. But one of the concerns I name, the reason I would even name it as a stumbling block in a boy's social development, is if that's the only context where a boy exists, like if his whole world revolves around sports, that's all he does. What can happen, doesn't always happen, but what we want to pay attention to is that he starts to develop relational strategies that are all about being against instead of for.
Ooh, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
boys, I think just naturally as they start to move into stage 3 and into stage 4, will start to relate in conversation by one-upping. I think about how often I hear moms say, I'm driving carpool and heard one of the boys I was taking home saying, I scored the winning goal at my soccer game. And no one said, that's awesome, or good for you, man.
Totally, it's
They're like,
terrible.
well, I scored too. Or, and so it turns
Yes.
into this, I got to one up or dominate the conversation.
Oh,
And
it's awful.
I just want us to pay attention to that. Again, I'm not trying to eliminate the competition in a boy, but I do want to help draw some attention to not only developing relational strategies. And I've even known some teenage boys and young men who do that in the context of dating. It's like they're so all about winning that it's like the pursuit and the
Sure.
of a girl's attention entices them. But once they're in the relationship, they're bored and they bail. And it's like, okay,
Wow.
that's a dangerous strategy. But I think those kinds of things can happen if we don't pay attention to that. And so it's why I'm always about, I want boys in context where they're also about just being for someone.
Yes.
Organizations like Scouts and youth group and D group and service. I want you to be volunteering as a family and plugging them
Yes.
into context for outreach, because I want him to be postured in a place of being for other people sometimes, and not just about against.
Yes, that is huge. And because my sons are surfers, my younger two are competitive surfers, and it's hard because it's not even a team sport. You're not even cheering for you are on your own and looking out for number one. And so we have really encouraged our son. There's a couple people who have set a great example to him of always commenting on social media, always encouraging. And so as much as, when he's on the water, he wants to win. But when he's out of the water, we really are continually helping him and encouraging him to be cheering for his buddies, to be supporting them and sharing what they're doing. And even when it's hard, you got to do it because it is shaping your character. Oh, I love all this so much. Well, we are talking about Are My Kids on Track? You've also written Wild Things. We'll have a list of the other books that I know my listeners would find helpful. If people want to track you down and follow you right now on social media, or what's the best place to find you?
I would say go to raisingboysandgirls.com, and everything we do is housed there. You could find our social media. You could find our podcast there. You could find a link to all of our books in that space. We've got a lot of free discussion guides on our website that go with the books if you want to, listen to the season of the podcast and then take it into some deeper conversation with a close friend or your spouse or a small group. And so, yes, I'd say raisingboysandgirls.com would be a great place to start.
Excellent. And then I would love if we can have you back another time in the future to talk about spiritual milestones and so many other things that I would love. I don't know if I've come across anyone that I feel like speaks my heart from a especially male therapist standpoint so well. And so I would love to team up with you more in the future. So David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Aloha and God bless. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And again, if you missed our previous conversation, be sure to go back to episode 78, where David and I talk about the 4 emotional milestones our sons need to reach. It was so good. So you'll find links to David's books and podcasts and notes about our conversation over in show notes, which are found at monicaswanson.com/podcast. Look for episode 80. All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spreading the word about this podcast. I appreciate you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And until next time, aloha.